Hello, Capstone English learners. Welcome back to another episode of Van's Journal. In this episode of Van's Journal, Van illustrates the emotional and psychological shift from being a passive participant to an active, independent builder. Let's hear what she has to say about the architecture of drive. She writes, "Inspiration is often romanticized as a lightning strike, a sudden, unbidden flash of clarity that strikes the idle mind. I have always found that notion to be somewhat patronizing to the actual work of creation. For me, motivation is less about a spark and more about the deliberate maintenance of an internal equilibrium that allows for high output thinking. If I were to audit the forces that propel me forward, they wouldn't be grand emotional gestures, but rather specific structural catalysts. First, I am profoundly motivated by autonomy. The freedom to govern my own intellectual landscape is not merely a preference, it is a requisite for my survival. The moment a project becomes dictated by bureaucratic whim rather than logical merit, my engagement begins to atrophy. I find a deep sense of purpose in building systems where I am the primary architect of the outcome. This independence allows me to pursue a path of ingenuity that is often stifled in more traditional top-down environments. Second, I am inspired by the concept of scarcity. Most people view a lack of resources or time as a hindrance, but I see it as a clarifying filter. When you have an unlimited budget or an infinite timeline, you produce bloat. When you have a hard deadline and lean resources, you are focused to find the most elegant, direct solution. The pressure of a ticking clock acts as a gravitational force, pulling a chaotic mess of ideas into a tight, functional orbit. It forces a level of focus that abundance simply cannot replicate. Third, I find a strange motivation in nuance. We live in an era of polarized binary thinking, where complex issues are flattened into sound bites. I am inspired by the challenge of uncovering the middle space, the subtle shades of gray that others overlook. There is a certain intellectual thrill in deconstructing a popular axiom that everyone else has accepted as absolute truth. Finding the exception to the rule is where the most significant breakthroughs occur. Fourth, I am driven by resonance. This is the rare moment when a private thought or a strategic framework finally makes contact with the real world and rings true for others. It isn't about seeking applause or external validation. It's about verifying that my internal model of the world aligns with objective reality. When a client finally sees the structure I've built, that moment of shared clarity creates a powerful vibrating energy that sustains me through the next round of solitary labor. Finally, I am motivated by my own propensity for improvement. I am my own most demanding critic, and I am perpetually haunted by the version 2.0 of everything I create. The knowledge that no system is ever truly finished, that there is always a more efficient, more resilient version waiting to be discovered, keeps me in a state of constant, productive dissatisfaction. I don't want to arrive at a destination. I want to perfect the vehicle. If you need to, feel free to have a second listen. Otherwise, let's take a look at some of the vocabulary words appearing in this episode. Autonomy, independence or self-governance. For example, the department was granted full autonomy to manage its own budget and hiring. Scarcity, the state of being in short supply. For example, the scarcity of skilled labor in the region has driven up wages significantly. Nuance, a subtle difference in meaning, expression, or sound. For example, a good diplomat must be able to understand the nuance in a high-stakes conversation. Resonance, the power to evoke enduring images or emotions. For example, the speech had a deep cultural resonance that lasted for decades after it was delivered. Axiom, a statement or proposition regarded as self-evidently true. For example, the axiom that knowledge is power remains the foundation of our educational system. Ingenuity, inventiveness or cleverness in design. For example, it took great ingenuity to repair the engine using only the tools found in the trunk. Equilibrium, a state of physical or mental balance. For example, he struggled to regain his emotional equilibrium after the shock of the announcement. Propensity, a natural inclination or tendency. For example, she has a well-known propensity for over-preparing for even the smallest meetings. Now that you have the vocabulary down pat, it's time for a drill. Reflect on your own motivators. Fill in the blanks to describe what drives your professional or personal life. You do not need to use the vocabulary from the monologue. I'll give you some time. Time's up. Here's what I came up with. I'd love to see your response, so go ahead and write it down in the comments. That's it for our lesson. Thanks for staying till the end. If it was helpful, like and subscribe so I know you want more content like this. See you next time.